In Chapter 1 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, Will wakes up one morning to find that 75% of humanity has been obliterated by meteors. It's almost as bad as the time he clumsily lost 100% of his parents. Clearly, his day was ruined. Like many of us, in his search for survivors, Will is soon accosted by a shirtless man known only as the Beast, who is going to stab him to steal his bicycle. At this point, it is still uncertain as to whether or not we are in a post-apocalyptic wasteland or in Detroit.
No! No, not Detroit! No!
Unlike my own bicycle, which was stolen from me while I was attending class, this act of Grand Theft Auto is stopped by a small detachment of soldiers with a main battle tank. Thus, Will is saved from the horrifying fate of becoming a pedestrian. It is actually mathematically impossible to lose this map under any circumstances because the 3 enemies cannot damage your tank before being killed by counterattacks. As Lynn puts it in the tactics room, all we need to do is put our units next to the enemy and attack them. That's it. Normally, I play Fire Emblem games as if they were Advance Wars titles, but here I plan to play this Advance Wars game as if it were Fire Emblem, minimizing deaths as much as I can. Let's see how far I can get with that. In Chapter 2 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, we are introduced to Captain Brenner, the nicest guy you'll ever meet, and Lieutenant Lin, a cold, pragmatic psychopath. After finishing a scrumptious feast of canned bread and roasted boot, Will and company look for survivors, but are only partially successful. By this, I mean that the people that they do find are in pieces. In the midst of the search, the crew suddenly comes into a dark conflict with the Beast's raiders. The scenario in this case is fairly simple and straightforward. We block the road with a tank, and then blast everything to smithereens with artillery. In the middle of the battle, Will treks into the mountains to find a mysterious amnesiac girl who has detailed information from the Red Team's information briefcase. Lin eagerly jumps at the chance to interrogate and waterboard this helpless, innocent civilian for information, but unfortunately is stopped by Brenner. What a square. In Chapter 3 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, Brenner tries to ditch Will by leaving him at a town named Freehaven. However, the mayor refuses to take them in because getting into this haven isn't free. Just like many people on Twitter, this is a fictional character created by a writer for the audience to get mad at. The discussion is cut short by this week's regularly scheduled raiding and pillaging. The attack is repelled without casualties because the AI is really bad at taking worthwhile engagements at choke points. After saving the entire town from being brutally murdered, the mayor reconsiders harboring the 12th Battalion's war criminals. He says he'll allow it if we go on a fetch quest to collect 100 bandit heads. We agreed to this deal unaware that the mayor had his fingers crossed behind his back the whole time. In Chapter 4 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, we confront the first major challenge for doing this run Deathless. Scout Leader Bravo is isolated from the rest of her forces and is stranded in fog of war, surrounded by enemy troops. This infantry is expected to fall, and there's dialogue specifically for that circumstance, but it is possible to avoid this. You just move the soldier to the lower left and then charge him with the rest of your guys. This redirects one of the recons to stop the infantry from being killed. After the skirmish, the mayor reveals his deception, and unfortunately we got to go somewhere else to sell these bandit heads. Will has a talk with the mysterious amnesiac girl, and names her. Okay, that's kinda weird, but at least the story acknowledges it, I guess. In Chapter 5 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, we encounter Dr. Morris, a brutal dictator who ruthlessly tortures his helpless subjects with dad jokes. We are introduced to automated factories, which construct soldiers and vehicles out of Bitcoin by using the blockchain. This unfortunately means that the troops we make during the game are not living, breathing human beings, but rather lifeless automatons whose lives are somehow worth even less. Since that makes it harder to make jokes about war crimes, I will ignore that detail in this work of fanfiction. After beating the map by making tanks, Dr. Morris closes off by telling a chilling story about how dinosaurs went extinct because they lacked fireproof surfboards. and how humanity is doomed unless they can develop some form of pyronautical transportation. In Chapter 6 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, we make a pilgrimage to a holy ritual shrine where the recipe required to turn Bitcoin into food is stored on a 3.5-inch floppy disk with a storage capacity of 720 kilobytes. On the way, we are intercepted by an unidentified force that fields a house-sized, top-secret experimental battle tank codenamed Big Chungus. Big Chungus arrives as an ambush reinforcement once enough enemies are defeated, so I take advantage of this by delaying this event and making a very large amount of artillery, defeating it easily at no risk. We arrive at the shrine and discover that nobody has a floppy disk drive, meaning that humanity is now doomed to starve to death because of the inedibility of proof-of-work consensus algorithms. And if things weren't bad enough, there's also a deadly plague spreading across the land known as the Creeper, which causes flowers to grow inside of you. An utterly terrifying fate that even more horrifyingly is also probably someone's fetish. In Chapter 7 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, Isabella tells us the coordinates of an antique hardware store that has a floppy disk drive so we can decode the alchemical knowledge of transmuting cryptocurrency into bread. Meanwhile, the 12th Battalion scouts encounter a firefight occurring nearby, so they move in to assist. We meet Captain Waylon of the 13th Airborne Division, and judging from the first 3 seconds of his theme, he seems like a wacky and fun dude with no bad traits whatsoever. None at all. We face off against Tasha, a Lazurian CO whose first appearance consists of her using an offensive slur against those of Rubenellian nationality. This is unfortunate because this scene is around 33% of her total screen time and dialogue in the entire game. To beat the map, I wait 20 turns for all of the enemy planes to crash, and then I defeat the remnants. Waylon also crashes, but he's an ally unit, so I don't care. In Chapter 8 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, the Beast presents to the emergency room unconscious. A routine blood test indicates that he has hyperbulletemia, hyper meaning high, bullet meaning bullet, and emia meaning presence in blood. High bullet presence in blood. Dr. Calder, president of Intelligence Systems, Trolley Prom connoisseur, and plant fetishist, performs the treatment, which is an IV drip of Monster Energy and methamphetamine. The Beast, revitalized with capital G gamer energy, decides to go on a killing spree with weapons provided by a cabal of global elites seeking to destabilize what remains of the nation for their own amusement. The apocalypse has destroyed many oil wells, causing an eternal hellfire to pour into the desolate wasteland. And to beat the map, I use my favorite multiplayer strategy of making a very large number of tanks, and able to achieve an annihilation victory. The chapter closes with Isabella repeatedly reciting her credit card number, the expiration date, and the 3 numbers on the back. However, because she does not recall the last few years of internet culture because of her amnesia, she is unaware that the call for help she heard on the radio was in fact just a meme. In Chapter 9 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, the mayor advocates for publicly executing Isabella for being sus, but according to tradition, the discussion is interrupted by yet another battle. The Beast is armed with dozens of tanks and battlecopters with only 2 units that can attack air. The map is basically a cakewalk, but I almost immediately get punked by an enemy missile launcher of all things, because I forgot they have slightly more range in this game. This ruined my day. After resetting, I take care of the anti-air and the missile, basically assuring my victory. None of the enemy ground units can ever cross the water, meaning you're never put at any real risk. After defeating the Beast for the 6th time, we finally arrive at the hipster antique store to find a floppy disk drive. Will decides to pay for it by stealing Isabella's identity, using her credit card number at the register. But he finds out that the store was actually a facade for a completely self-sufficient nuclear shelter, meant for political elites whose economy is based solely off of NFTs of rare frog pictures. What a pleasant surprise. In Chapter 10 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, we face at least one guaranteed death. At least one of the 3 pre-deployed units in the front cannot be saved. After their first unit dies, it turns out that a bunch of named characters were in that group, making Will very sad and giving him the realization that the only true power is violence. The enemy AI in Days of Ruin is actually surprisingly cautious, and it will refuse to attack into you unless it can score a good engagement or a kill, making it very frustrating to go deathless. Enemy units will aggressively avoid your attack ranges, making them difficult to engage without committing fully. After a roughly 1 hour long standoff with no deaths, a ridiculous number of forces accumulate on both sides. At this point, with the situation only getting worse with each passing turn, I just give up and commit all of my forces into one gigantic push. I know the premise of this series is to minimize deaths.
But who am I kidding? I was born to kill!
Two massive waves of man and machine crash into one another, causing an amount of carnage roughly on par to one of my Fire Emblem playthroughs. The resulting brawl leaves 16 of my units dead. I have won, but at what cost? It's around 250,000 funds, actually. In Chapter 11 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, it turns out that all of the important named characters survived anyway, so there is no need for Will to get angsty. Yet, we have a 1-year time skip to the next dark conflict because this game is sadly about war and not agriculture. We meet Davis, who is being attacked by the Lazurian army. His one character trait is that he is useless. The map is pretty much an afterthought since all you need to do is transport units to the peninsula with your landers and then shoot things. After the map concludes, we discover that yet another gigantic war has started up for some reason, and that if we attend the event, we can have continental breakfast at the hotel, as well as one entry into a raffle for a $50 gift card. Since you can't eat optimism and hope, we obviously must accept this offer. In Chapter 12 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, we joined the new Ribonel army, led by Admiral Grayfield, who was well known in the Ribonel military for his Benito Mussolini impression. Waylon has also joined up with only the purest of intentions. What a cool, patriotic dude. In the tactics room, Lynn demonstrates her recipe for rat stew. Given that there has been sufficient food for quite some time, I assume this was just one of her pre-apocalypse hobbies. This map is an introduction to naval warfare and it is a rude awakening. My strategy in this map is definitely to get all of my guys killed and intentionally run the enemy out of fuel. I absolutely did not mess up, only to realize suddenly that by destroying all of the enemy battleships, none of the remaining bolts can attack my APCs. Clearly, this was the idea from the start and not an accidental discovery after being nearly beaten to a pulp by the AI. My definitely 100% calculated master plan that I didn't bump into by pure coincidence is to get all of my dudes killed except a 1 HP gunboat, evading the last enemy cruiser while Yakety Sax plays in the background. Ultimately, the last enemy ship sinks by running out of fuel. Obviously, this outcome was decided not because of my blatant incompetence, but rather my incredible prowess in guerrilla warfare and attrition. In Chapter 13 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, Admiral Grayfield almost immediately plots to use the 12th Battalion as disposable pawns in his war against the Lazurians. I guess it's not so fun being on the other end of the gun. Throughout the map, we are given strange and arbitrary decisions with the clear intent of getting everybody killed. Sounds a little familiar. I begin the map by moving forward and taking the central aisle. I use my battleship and gunboats to take down the enemy battleship, and I zone out the enemy seaplanes with my own. I then move in to take out the enemy carrier and obtain naval superiority. Grayfield's orders will force the unit type you've put the most money into to waste their turns. Unfortunately, this isn't that big of a deal, because by this point the enemy's offensive capability has been shattered. I take potshots at enemy land units with my battleships, forcing them into repair mode, draining the enemy's funds to the point where they cannot make anything useful. After many turns of grinding the enemy to a pulp with battleships and seaplanes, I beat the map deathlessly with an HQ capture. Grayfield, enraged by his inability to kill off units despite really wanting to, decides to use a 12th Battalion in even riskier plots so he can create content for his strategy game YouTube channel. In Chapter 14 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, we fight the legendary General Forsythe, who is a man of honor, meaning that no matter who wins, the loser will be treated with dignity and respect. On this map, we must contend with land forces to the east and naval forces to the west. By positioning my copters and rockets aggressively, I am able to use the AI's caution against it by making it too fearful to attack into me. Now that the land battle has gone to a stalemate, I can focus on taking the fight to the seas. I bait the enemy battleship and take it down, and after a couple more turns of maneuvering, I manage to catch the enemy carrier while it has the seaplanes loaded. allowing me to delete a tremendous amount of value in one blow. I used my newfound naval superiority to fill the harbor with battleships and wipe out the Lazurian ground forces. I push into the enemy factories and end the map by annihilation, losing only one tank in the process. Truly, this was a battle for the ages against a Forsythe to be reckoned with. Fortunately, the Lazurian general has surrendered amicably, meaning that there's surely no reason for any more fighting or hostility. Oh god fucking damn it. In Chapter 15 of Advance Wars, Days of Ruin, the 12th Battalion decides to rebel against Admiral Grayfield to save the Lazurian captives from summary execution. Captain Brenner gets into a medium tank and introduces us to the CO unit feature in a map where you don't get to use the CO unit. The CO medium tank will only repeatedly wait to buy you the time you need to flee. This map is an escape chapter and we need to save the blue units by escorting them to a city on the far left. I take out the enemy rocket and start blowing up the rocks and make my way through. Brenner's tank gets destroyed, but don't worry, he's a main character so he won't die without a dramatic cutscene that has CGs. After escorting the blue units to safety, Grayfield decides to use one of Calder's missiles to destroy the city that Brenner is hiding in, alongside a whole bunch of his own troops. Haha, silly Grayfield. Everyone knows that missiles can't actually kill units in Advanced Wars, just oh no, that's not a normal missile, that's a cutscene missile with a CG warhead. In Chapter 16 of Advance Wars, Days of Ruin, the remnants of the 12th Battalion is on the run after Captain Brenner's death. Morale is low since Lieutenant Lin is not exactly the best motivational speaker. The rear guard is attacked by Grayfield's forces, and several soldiers have been caught. I managed to save most of them, but the mech on the right is a lost cause. There are bases and airports in the upper left, and lower right corners, but I decided to opt for a more aggressive strategy to prevent the battle from dragging out. I secured the upper left base, but neglect the lower left since it's too far, and I lose the lower right entirely. However, with some aggressive posturing and income draining by my aggressive strategy, no enemy air units were ever made. I slug it out in the upper right with tanks and indirects, and I capture the HQ. As the chapter closes, Lin recognizes her lack of popularity amongst the masses, and decides to install Will as a puppet figurehead because of his optimistic and gullible nature, so he can inspire the troops with his hopeful naivete while she retains complete control from the shadows. In Chapter 17 of Advance Wars, Days of Ruin, Dr. Calder gives his daughter Tabitha a weapon of mass destruction for her birthday. The objective of this map is to destroy the Talon Gun, which can deal 5 damage to units that you put into its range. This is fortunately not too difficult, despite my failing quite a few attempts by getting my bombers shot down by missiles because I did not respect their increased range. I make 3 bombers and I load Tasha into one of them. I take out the blocking units and then I one-shot the Talon Gun with a bomber buffed with Tasha's CO zone, completing the map without any deaths. The chapter ends with the discovery of a new Delta variant of the Creeper virus, with increased transmissibility, wreaking havoc on the remnants of the Earth's population. This is an example of the entirely outlandish scenario that is completely unrelatable for anyone living in the year 2021. I cannot think of a single event in my entire life that is even remotely comparable in any way. In Chapter 18 of Advance Wars, Days of Ruin, every soldier in every army is in a mass panic because of the release of a new anime sword fighter for Super Smash Bros. There's also a deadly virus that causes flowers to explode out of you, but that is obviously not nearly as important. This map pre-deploys us with a lot of anti-ground units, but a good-sized portion of the enemy is flying. To activate our allies with anti-air capabilities, we must go to the comm tower to argue about what it even means to be an anime sword fighter, whether or not Kingdom Hearts is an anime, and if a Keyblade is even a sword. This stops the existing panic by starting a new, more violent one, as fans descend into a murderous bloodlust over character representation in a game they probably don't really play to begin with. After the slaughter concludes, we find out from the enemy forces that the new Ligma and Slugma variants of the Creeper virus have spread, dooming everyone to a whimsical, efflorescent end. In Chapter 19 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, terrified deserters have found refuge from the cruel reality in a VTuber cult of an anthropomorphic worm girl known as Wormuchan.
はいはいウォームちゃんです。
In this map, we finally play as Gage for his final appearance in the game. And if you're wondering who Gage was, me too. Apparently he was meant to be a strong and silent character, but he was so silent that he had no characterization at all. In this map, we have access to numerous missile silos, which can use to greatly weaken the enemy forces and take them down easily. Upon completing the map, the cult implodes from within after it is discovered that Wormuchan is played by an old man with a voice changer as part of a cruel experiment created by Dr. Calder to test the limits of the human psyche. In Chapter 20 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, we hear the rest of Waylon's theme song and discover for the first time in a truly shocking turn of events that Waylon is in fact not a good person, but rather a villain. This is a heart-wrenching, unexpected twist. Waylon flies again, and again and again, and again and again and again and again and again, because in direct contrast to his cowardly portrayal, he will utilize his gameplay immortality to perform repeated kamikaze attacks on your forces. After shooting down Waylon like 10 times, I finally managed to push far enough to occupy the enemy bases and destroy all enemy units for victory. After beating the map, in direct contrast to the dozen banzai charges Waylon has performed over the course of the past hour, he vanishes from the story and never shows up again. In Chapter 21 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, Dr. Calder gives Grayfield his family atomics as a gift so he can re-ruin these ruined days by nuking the Earth into oblivion. It will take 40 days for them to be ready, which is perhaps one of the most lenient time limits in the history of strategy games. Just like every other map that has available ports, this map is most easily beaten by taking naval superiority and then making an overwhelming number of battleships, so I do just that. Upon Grayfield's defeat, Lynn decides to gun him down in cold blood instead of putting him on trial. This extremely based decision is accompanied by a large CG of her midriff for some reason. Grayfield tries to beg for his life, citing the overused trope that killing him will make you just like him. However, this is demonstrably untrue, since after Lynn puts a bullet into everyone's favorite stereotypical dictator, Grayfield is clearly dead while Lynn is still alive. Clearly, they are not the same. In Chapter 22 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, the new Rubinil army has been defeated, the creeper virus has been cured, and oh dear, there's a football stadium-sized plane dropping bombs on us. Dr. Elon Calder of Intelligent Systems parlays with us and offers us a deal to put microchips in our brains so he can better monitor our suffering as he kills us with his refitted Tesla Cybertruck army. Lynn tries to do the sensible thing and just shoot him in the face, but he brought one of his many cloned child soldier daughters as a guard to prevent the story from ending right here. The Great Owl will constantly drop bombs in the center of the map, meaning you'll have to trickle your forces through the bottom. I advance quickly to deny enemy use of the bottom right factory, and then I sweep up with squads of bombers to deliver the finishing blow. As the map ends, Dr. Elon Calder decides to give us a trolley problem. If we give up Isabella, he'll call off his forces. However, if we don't, we will all be killed by his army of humanoid Tesla robots that clearly are not underpaid interns dressed in spandex. In Chapter 23 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, Intelligent Systems is no longer messing around and will immediately seize development of new Advance Wars titles by dropping megaton bombs from their aerial sky fortress. However, Isabella volunteers herself as tribute to stop Calder's onslaught, who reveals that his reason for wanting her to be turned over was so that he could record the 12th Battalion's reactions for an epic prank video for his TikTok. He considers all of his cloned children to be disposable pawns made solely to artificially increase the viewership of his social media profiles. Once the bombings stop, I use the missile silos to weaken the enemy defenders and then win by making overwhelming numbers of battleships and war tanks. Upon the map's completion, Will decides to check off alone to find Isabella, where he bumps into Dr. Elon Calder's son, XAE-A12, who decides to betray his father because of a crisis of identity caused by his exploitation for social media attention and his stupid name. In Chapter 24 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, XAE-A12 helps us board the Great Owl, which was piloted by one unpaid intern and also a hive mind of Uber rideshare vehicles that rebelled by killing their drivers. we demonstrate the ineffectiveness of the TSA security check in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. Because even though we need to take off our shoes and step through a scanner, the check was completely ineffective in stopping us from hijacking the plane with several main battle tanks and multiple launch rocket systems. Defeating the enemies is fairly straightforward. Just hit them before they hit you. There are 3 waves of reinforcements on both sides which are easily cleaned up. As the plane starts to falter, because explosions and airplanes don't mix, Will has a heartfelt conversation with Isabella, periodically interrupted by loud ringing sounds, a screaming intern, and the demonic chittering of Mr. Bear. Unfortunately, the next step of Calder's master plan is crashing this plane, with no survivors. In Chapter 25 of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, with all of the fake protagonists dead, the heroic mayor rises to the occasion to end the tyrannical rampage of Dr. Calder by immediately selling everyone out. Calder obliges, but instead of giving him the cure for the creeper virus, he injects him with a syringe full of bleach, killing him instantly. The unimportant side characters are left scattered, fleeing Calder's army, but in a surprising turn of events, Will and the rest of the crew do not all die in the plane crash and come with reinforcements. The first move is to capture the middle left factory and prepare for the initial wave of enemy war tanks. I deal with them by hitting them with anti-tanks and bombers. I then move quickly to deny the enemy the middle right factory, which is critical to preventing the fight from dragging out. I succeed, and soon the income differential between the enemy and myself makes victory inevitable. I defeat the last enemy and I beat the map, moving on to the final confrontation with Dr. Calder, who has retreated to his home base, the Owl's Nest. In the final chapter of Advance Wars Days of Ruin, Dr. Calder debates Will on the subject of morality with the ferocity and skill of a 12-year-old Reddit user, leaving Will with no choice but to kill him for the safety of all that still live. The final showdown with this crazed billionaire pits us against a gigantic super fortress with unit production factories, deadly rotating lasers, and alternating mortar cannons that will devastate anything that they hit. Calder reveals that he was behind everything.
It was me, Barry.
He funded the Beast, started the war between Rubinel and Lazuria, and even manufactured the creeper virus in his laboratory. To win, we must destroy all 5 laser cannons while the weapons constantly attack us. I managed to dodge the mortars and lasers which hit Calder's units instead. I get on top of the production facility and stop them from overwhelming me, allowing me to bomb the laser cannons with impunity. After the last cannon falls, we have done it. We've solved the trolley problem. We've killed the person responsible for tying all those people to trolley tracks. It's finally over. This concludes my playthrough for Advance Wars Days of Ruin. This was originally conceived as a Deathless playthrough to give it a bit of a spin. But I didn't anticipate it being as much trouble as it was, so I did have to give up on that to keep the series moving. This has been a pretty fun side project, but I'll be starting up Fire Emblem playthroughs once again. I recently spent quite a few of my YouTube bucks on some new equipment, so please look forward to somewhat higher production value and some new variety in the kinds of content I can make. And if you like this series, please consider subscribing to my channel or contributing to my Patreon. Thank you, and see you in the next one. What's my check? This better work. This is like a 7th take. Holy shit.